The snow wasn't the only thing burying the secrets of the Catskill Mountains that night. A woman, hiding from a past she couldn't outrun, opened her door to a storm and found a wolf in sheep's clothing, dying on her porch. She didn't know his name. She didn't know he held the keys to the city's most violent underworld. She only knew he was bleeding out. But mercy has a price. When she saved his life, she didn't expect a thank you card. She certainly didn't expect the sun to rise on a convoy of 500 black SUVs surrounding her isolated cabin, turning her sanctuary into a war zone. This isn't just a romance, it's a hostage situation of the heart. The wind howled through the valley like a wounded animal, rattling the single-pane windows of the cedar cabin. Inside, Sierra Brooks tightened the wool blanket around her shoulders and stared at the dying embers in the fireplace. The weather report on the radio had called it a historic nor'easter, predicting 3 feet of snow by morning. But to Sierra, it just looked like the world was trying to erase itself. That suited her fine. Erasure was exactly what she had come to the mountains for. She stood up to toss another log on the fire when a sound cut through the screaming wind. It wasn't the crack of a freezing branch or the settling of the house. It was a heavy, dull thud against the front door. Sierra froze. She was 5 miles from the nearest paved road, 10 miles from the town of Phoenicia. Nobody came up here. Not in this weather. Not by accident. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace stand. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a rhythm she hadn't felt since leaving the trauma ward in Chicago 3 months ago. She moved to the door, her hand hovering over the deadbolt. "Hello?" she called out. Her voice sounded thin, swallowed by the storm outside. Silence. Then a low, guttural groan vibrating through the wood. Sierra didn't think. The instinct that had driven her for 10 years as an ER nurse overrode her fear. She threw the bolt and yanked the door open. The wind violently slammed the door against the interior wall, blowing snow and ice into the living room. Lying face down on her porch, half buried in a drift, was a man. He was massive, his broad shoulders stretching the fabric of a coat that cost more than her car, a cashmere blend, now ruined by dark, freezing slush. "Hey!" Sierra dropped the poker and fell to her knees in the snow. "Can you hear me?" She rolled him over. The porch light flickered, illuminating a face that was severe, sharp-angled, and deathly pale. His lips were blue. Ice crystals clung to thick, dark eyelashes. But it was the stain spreading across his white dress shirt that made Sierra's stomach drop. Blood. Bright, arterial red, steaming in the freezing air. "Damn it!" she hissed. She hooked her arms under his armpits. He was heavy, dead weight, easily 220 pounds of muscle. With a grunt of exertion that strained her lower back, she dragged him across the threshold, his Italian leather shoes scraping against the wood floor. She kicked the door shut, fighting the wind, and locked it. The silence of the cabin returned, but the atmosphere had changed. The safety was gone. Sierra fell into triage mode. Fear was a luxury. Action was a necessity. She ripped open his expensive shirt, buttons scattering across the floor like pearls. The wound was jagged. A gunshot just below the ribs on the left side. No exit wound. The bullet was still inside. He wasn't just freezing to death. He was bleeding out internally. "Stay with me," she ordered the unconscious stranger. She pressed her fingers to his neck. His pulse was thready, erratic, and terrifyingly slow. She ran to the kitchen, grabbing every clean towel she owned, a bottle of vodka, and her emergency medical kit, a relic from her past life she hadn't been able to throw away. When she returned, his eyes were still closed, but his body was shivering violently. Hypothermia was setting in. fighting the blood loss for the right to kill him first. Sierra worked with mechanical precision. She packed the wound with gauze, applying pressure until her own arms shook. She needed to get his body temperature up, but not too fast, or the shock would stop his heart. She dragged the mattress from the spare room into the living room, placing it directly in front of the fire. She managed to wrestle him out of his wet, bloody clothes. His body was a map of violence. Old scars crisscrossed his torso, white lines telling stories of knives and glass. A tattoo on his right pectoral muscle depicted a double-headed eagle holding a serpent. She covered him with every blanket in the house, then lay down beside him, not for comfort, but to transfer body heat. It was a desperate, intimacy born of survival move. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, burying the cabin, burying the blood on the porch, burying the tire tracks of whoever, or whatever, had dumped him there. Around 3 a.m., the shivering stopped. Sierra, half dozing, jolted awake. She checked his pulse. It was stronger, rhythmic. She pulled back, sitting up to check his wound. The bleeding had slowed to a sluggish ooze. He was stable. Suddenly, a hand shot out from beneath the blankets. It clamped around her throat. It wasn't a squeeze of panic. It was a grip of calculated control. Sierra gasped, clawing at the wrist. The man's eyes flew open. They weren't hazy with fever. They were clear, dark, and utterly devoid of fear. They were the eyes of a predator who had woken up in a strange den. "Who sent you?" His voice was a rasp, like gravel grinding on steel. "Nobody," Sierra choked out, her vision spotting. "I saved you." He didn't let go. He scanned the room, the fire, the snow piled against the window, the medical supplies. He processed the information in a split second. Slowly, he released her throat. Sierra scrambled back, coughing, grabbing the fire poker again. "You're welcome," she rasped, glaring at him. The man tried to sit up but groaned, clutching his side. He looked at the bandages, then at Sierra. A flicker of something, recognition, respect, passed through his eyes. "Where am I?" he asked. "The Catskills." "Nowhere," Sierra said, keeping the weapon raised. "Who are you? And don't tell me you're a lost hiker." He looked at the fire, the shadows dancing across his sharp features. "My name is Darren Moretti." Sierra lowered the poker slightly. She didn't know the face, but she knew the name. Everyone in New York knew the name. Moretti wasn't just a family. It was an institution. Construction, sanitation, shipping, and everything that happened in the shadows between them. She had dragged the devil into her living room. "Well, Darren," Sierra said, her voice trembling only slightly, "you're bleeding on my rug, and if you choke me again, I'll put the bullet back in." Darren looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time, a corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Fair enough," he whispered, and then he passed out. The next few hours were a blur of vigilance and fear. Sierra didn't sleep. She sat in the armchair, the poker across her lap, watching the chest of the crime lord rise and fall. Why hadn't she just let him freeze? It was the nurse in her. The damn oath. It was a reflex that had cost her her marriage, her sanity, and now, potentially, her life. When dawn broke, it brought no light, only a grey, suffocating haze. The snow was piled halfway up the windows. They were trapped. Darren woke again at 8 a.m. This time, there was no violence. He was burning up. The fever had set in. "Water," he croaked. Sierra approached him cautiously, holding a glass. She knelt, lifting his head. He drank greedily, water spilling down his chin. "The phone," he murmured, his eyes unfocused. "I need to make a call." "Lines are down," Sierra said, placing a cool cloth on his forehead. "Cell towers, too. The storm knocked out everything. We're on an island here." Darren cursed in Italian. He tried to move, but the pain pinned him to the mattress. "They'll think I'm dead. If they think I'm dead, the city burns." "Who shot you, Darren?" Sierra asked, checking the dressing. It needed changing. He looked at her, his eyes glassy. "My brother, Luca." The admission hung in the air, heavy and cold. "Family dispute?" Sierra asked dryly, trying to keep her hands steady as she peeled back the blood-soaked gauze. "Hostile takeover," Darren corrected. He flinched as she poured antiseptic over the wound. "He wanted the seat at the head of the table. He invited me to a cabin, just 10 miles south of here. Said we needed to talk territory. It was a setup." Sierra worked silently. She knew about trauma. She knew that physical wounds were often the least complicated part of the equation. "I took 2 of his men out before I got hit," Darren continued, his voice detaching from the pain, reciting the events like a report. "Ran into the woods. The storm covered my tracks, but it almost finished the job." "You're lucky the bullet missed your spleen," Sierra said, taping fresh gauze down. "But you need a surgeon, Darren. I'm a nurse. I can keep you alive, but I can't fix you." "You're doing fine," he muttered, closing his eyes. "What's your name?" "Tessa," she lied. "Tessa Correa." He opened one eye. "You're a terrible liar, but I appreciate the OPSEC." Sierra flushed. "It's Sierra Brooks." "Sierra." He rolled the name around on his tongue. "Like the earth, the pigment." He reached out, his hand incredibly hot, and grasped her wrist. This time it was gentle. "If Luca finds me here, he will kill you. You know that, right?" "I figured," she said, pulling her hand away. "That's why we're going to hope the snow keeps hiding us." "No," Darren said, struggling to keep his eyes open. "Luca is impatient. But my men, my real men, Vincent, they will be looking. I have a tracker, embedded, in my watch." Sierra looked at the heavy platinum chronograph on his wrist. It was stopped, smashed during his escape or the fall. "It's broken, Darren. The distress signal sends a last location before death," he whispered, fighting consciousness. "They know I'm in this radius. If Luca gets here first, you run. Do you hear me? You leave me and you run." "I'm not leaving you to die," Sierra said firmly. "Stubborn," Darren whispered, a faint smile touching his lips. "I like stubborn." The fever took him again, plunging him into a delirium of muttered Italian and names of dead men. Sierra spent the day pacing. She checked the windows every 10 minutes. The snow was relentless. She made soup from canned stock, forcing Darren to eat whenever he surfaced from the darkness. By nightfall, the cabin felt smaller. The intimacy of caretaking was stripping away the barrier between them. She wiped his face. She held him when the chills racked his body so hard his teeth chattered. She saw the man beneath the monster. He wasn't the ruthless kingpin the papers described, or maybe he was, but in this cabin, stripped of his suit and his soldiers, he was just a man fighting to survive betrayal. Around midnight, the fever broke. Darren fell into a deep, restful sleep. Sierra finally allowed herself to close her eyes in the armchair. She woke to silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. The wind had stopped. The storm was over. Sunlight, brilliant and blinding, was streaming through the upper panes of the windows where the snow hadn't reached. Sierra stood up, stretching her stiff back. She looked at the mattress. Darren was awake. He was sitting up, leaning against the sofa, his face pale but the fever gone. He was holding her fire poker, staring at the front door. "Darren," she asked. "Quiet," he commanded. He wasn't looking at the door. He was listening. Sierra listened too. At first, she heard nothing. Then, she felt it. A vibration in the floorboards. A low, thrumming rumble that grew louder and louder, shaking the dust from the ceiling beams. It sounded like an earthquake. "Is that a plow?" Sierra asked. "No," Darren said, using the sofa to pull himself to his feet. He winced, clutching his side, but stood tall. He looked at Sierra, his eyes intense. "That's the cavalry. The question is, whose cavalry?" The rumble became a roar. Sierra ran to the window, climbing onto a chair to see over the snowdrift. Her breath hitched in her throat. The pristine, white landscape of the valley had been shattered. A line of black vehicles, stretching as far as the eye could see, was carving a path through the deep snow. Massive, modified SUVs with reinforced bumpers and snow tires. 1, 10, 50. They didn't stop coming. They filled the narrow logging road, spilling over into the tree line. It looked like an invasion force. It looked like the president was visiting, if the president brought an army. There were hundreds of them. 500 engines idling, creating a cloud of exhaust that mingled with the morning mist. They came to a halt in a perfect, menacing formation outside her cabin. The lead vehicle, a monster of a truck with bulletproof glass, stopped 10 yards from her porch. "Darren," Sierra whispered, stepping back from the window. "There are so many." Darren limped to the window. He looked out at the sea of black steel against the white snow. He didn't look afraid. He adjusted the tattered remains of his dress shirt, trying to look like a king despite the bloodstains. "Luca wouldn't bring an army," Darren said, his voice cold. "He would bring a hit squad. This is a statement." "A statement from who?" "From me," Darren said. "Or rather, for me." The door of the lead SUV opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a long charcoal wool coat and holding an assault rifle with practiced ease. He scanned the perimeter, then looked directly at the cabin door. "That's Vincent," Darren exhaled, his shoulders dropping an inch. "I'm alive." But Sierra didn't feel relief. She looked at the 500 cars. She looked at the men beginning to pour out of them. Armed, serious, dangerous men. They were surrounding her home. They were securing the perimeter. She hadn't just saved a man. She had invited a war into her sanctuary. "What happens now?" Sierra asked, her voice trembling. Darren turned to her. The softness from the fever night was gone, replaced by the hard mask of the dawn. But his eyes were still the ones that had watched her while she cleaned his wounds. "Now," Darren said, "you open the door, and you don't leave my side, because the world just found out I'm vulnerable, and that makes you the most dangerous weakness I have." Sierra looked at the door. Then she looked at the man who had promised to protect her, the man who brought an army to her doorstep. She walked to the door and unlocked it. The sound of 500 car doors slamming shut echoed through the valley like a single gunshot. The silence that followed the arrival of the convoy was shattered by the crunch of boots on snow. Not one pair, but dozens. Vincent, the man in the charcoal coat, didn't wait for an invitation. He signaled with 2 fingers, and a tactical team of 6 men moved up the porch steps with fluid, terrifying efficiency. They swept past Sierra as if she were a piece of furniture, guns drawn, clearing the corners of the small cabin. "Clear!" shouted a man with a scar running through his eyebrow. "Clear!" echoed another from the kitchen. Sierra stood with her back pressed against the open door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She watched as Vincent holstered his rifle and stepped inside. He ignored her completely, his eyes locking onto Darren, who was leaning heavily against the sofa, his face grey with exhaustion. "Boss?" Vincent said, his voice tight with relieved tension. He moved to support Darren. "We lost the signal when the storm hit. We've been tearing the mountain apart for 12 hours. "I'm alive, Vincent," Darren said, wincing as he shifted his weight. "Barely." Vincent's gaze finally snapped to Sierra. It wasn't a look of gratitude. It was a cold, calculating assessment. He looked at her flannel pajamas, her messy hair, and the blood dried under her fingernails. "Who is the civilian?" Vincent asked, his hand drifting toward the pistol at his hip. "The reason I'm breathing," Darren said sharply. The command in his voice stopped Vincent's hand mid-air. "She pulled me out of the snow. She packed the wound. She stays untouched. Is that understood?" "Understood," Vincent said, though his eyes remained suspicious. He tapped his earpiece. "Bring the medical transport to the door. We move now." 2 men rushed in with a stretcher. As they loaded Darren onto it, Sierra felt a strange, sinking sensation. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her cold and exposed. "Wait," Sierra said, stepping forward. "You can't just move him like that. He has internal injuries. The movement could dislodge the clot." Vincent turned on her. "We have the best trauma surgeons in the state waiting in the city. We don't need advice from a vet." "I'm an ER nurse," Sierra snapped, her anger overriding her fear. "And if you bounce him down this mountain in a truck, he'll bleed out before you hit the highway." Darren raised a hand from the stretcher. The room went silent. "She's right," Darren rasped. He looked at Vincent. "She rides with me." Sierra froze. "What? No, absolutely not. I did my part. You have your army. I'm staying here." Darren looked at her. His eyes were dark pools of pain, but the intelligence behind them was razor-sharp. He gestured for Vincent to lean in. He whispered something in his lieutenant's ear. Vincent's expression shifted from annoyance to shock. He looked at Sierra with new eyes, scrutinizing her face, searching for something. "Are you sure, boss?" Vincent asked quietly. "Positive," Darren said. Vincent straightened up and turned to Sierra. "Pack a bag, Miss Brooks. You have 5 minutes." "I am not going anywhere." Sierra backed away until she hit the wall. "I saved his life. You can't just kidnap me." "We aren't kidnapping you," Vincent said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We're extracting you, because about 20 minutes behind us is a second convoy, and they aren't coming to rescue anyone. They're coming to finish the job Luca started. They will burn this cabin to the ground, with you inside to destroy the evidence." Sierra felt the blood drain from her face. "Luca. Darren's brother doesn't leave loose ends," Vincent explained, checking his watch. "He knows Darren was in this sector. If he finds you alive, he'll make you wish you froze to death." Sierra looked at Darren. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the ceiling, fighting consciousness, but his hand was outstretched toward her. "Sierra," Darren whispered, "I owe you a life. Let me save yours. Get in the car." The reality of her situation crashed down on her. She had fled Chicago to escape a violent ex-husband, a detective who used the law as a weapon. She had come here to be invisible. Now, by saving one monster, she had attracted the attention of another. If she stayed, she died. If she went, she was walking into the heart of organized crime. 4 minutes, Vincent barked. Sierra ran. She grabbed her go-bag from under her bed. Passport, cash, a burner phone. She threw on jeans and a heavy parka. She took one last look at the cabin, her sanctuary, knowing she would likely never see it again. She walked out the front door. The cold air hit her face, biting and sharp. The convoy was waiting, 500 engines rumbling in a low, harmonious growl. It was a display of power so excessive it was almost absurd. Vincent guided her not to a prisoner transport, but to the back of the lead armored SUV where they had loaded Darren. The interior was like a spaceship, leather, screens, and medical equipment. She climbed in. The door slammed shut, sealing them in a quiet, bulletproof cocoon. Darren was hooked up to an IV and a monitor. He watched her buckle her seatbelt. "Smart choice," he murmured. "I didn't have a choice," Sierra retorted, staring out the tinted window as the convoy began to move. "You made sure of that?" "Sometimes," Darren said, closing his eyes as the morphine drip began to take hold. "Freedom is just the ability to choose your own jailer." The SUV lurched forward. Sierra watched her cabin disappear into the white distance. Behind them, hundreds of black vehicles fell into formation, a snake of iron and steel winding its way down the mountain, taking her away from the only peace she had known in years. The journey to New York City took 3 hours. The convoy moved with aggressive authority, other cars on the highway swerving onto shoulders to let the massive procession pass. It was a funeral procession for the living. Sierra spent the ride monitoring Darren's vitals. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his hand occasionally twitching to grip the sheets of the gurney. Every time he woke, his eyes sought her out, checking she was still there. It was possessive, unsettling. When they hit the city limits, the convoy split. 450 SUVs peeled off in different directions, decoys and perimeter security. Only the core 50 vehicles continued toward Manhattan. They didn't go to a hospital. They went to the financial district. The SUV drove directly into the underground cargo entrance of a massive glass skyscraper that pierced the grey sky like a needle. The Moretti Spire. "We're here," Vincent announced from the front seat. The loading bay was swarming with armed men. As the doors opened, the noise of the city rushed in, shouting, mechanical whirring, the distant sirens. They rushed Darren to a private elevator. Sierra was hustled along beside him, flanked by 2 guards who looked like they chewed glass for breakfast. "Where are the surgeons?" Sierra asked, as the elevator shot upward, ears popping as they passed the 40th floor. "He needs imaging. He needs a CT scan." "The penthouse has a full medical suite," Vincent said, staring at the floor indicator. "Dr. Aris is meeting us there." The elevator doors pinged open on the 90th floor. The penthouse was less a home and more a museum of wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the storm-battered city. Modern art that cost millions hung on the walls. But the center of activity was a sterile, white-walled wing to the left. They wheeled Darren into the surgical bay. It was impressive. State-of-the-art anesthesia machines, a crash cart, bright surgical lights. But the room was empty. Vincent stopped, looking around. "Where is Aris?" One of the guards, a young man named Matteo, ran into the room, looking pale. "Vincent, we found him in the supply closet." Vincent's face hardened. "And?" "Throat slit," Matteo said grimly. "Rigor has set in. He's been dead since last night." Sierra gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Luca," Darren growled from the gurney. He was lucid, fueled by pain and rage. "He got to the doctor. He knew I'd come back here wounded. He wanted to make sure I had no help." Vincent slammed his fist against the metal tray table, sending instruments clattering. "We need to get him to Mount Sinai. Now! No!" Darren shouted, forcing himself up on his elbows before collapsing back with a groan. "No public hospitals. Luca will have eyes there. If I go into a public OR, I don't come out." His face was twisting in agony. The color had drained completely from his skin. The monitor began to beep rapidly. "BP is dropping," Sierra said, looking at the screen. 80/50. He's crashing. The internal bleeding has restarted." Vincent looked at the dead doctor's empty station, then at the dying Don, and finally at Sierra. He drew his gun. It wasn't a threat of immediate violence, but a transfer of responsibility. He pointed the barrel at the floor, but his eyes bored into hers. "You said you're a nurse," Vincent said. "I am," Sierra said, her voice shaking, "but I'm not a surgeon. I can't operate on a gunshot wound." "You're all we have," Vincent said calmly. "Wash up. I could kill him. He's dead anyway if you don't." Vincent stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Listen to me. There are 5,000 families in this city who depend on the stability Darren provides. If he dies, there is a war that will fill the streets with blood. You are going to go into that sink, you are going to scrub your hands, and you are going to take that bullet out." Sierra looked at Darren. He was watching her. He didn't plead. He didn't beg. He just looked at her with that same intense curiosity he'd had in the cabin. "Do it, Sierra," Darren whispered. "I trust you." It was the most terrifying thing anyone had ever said to her. Sierra took a deep breath. She thought about the trauma bay in Chicago. She thought about the nights she had spent, holding retractor blades for attendings, watching their hands, learning the dance of steel and flesh. She knew the anatomy. She knew the procedure. She just had never been the one holding the scalpel. "Get me 4 units of O-negative blood," Sierra ordered, her voice changing. The tremble was gone. The nurse was back. "Mateo, you're on anesthesia. Do you know how to run the gas?" I know the basics," Mateo stammered. "Figure it out. Don't kill him with the sevoflurane," Sierra commanded. She turned to Vincent. You're my circulating nurse. Open the sterile packs. Gloves, size 7. Lap sponges. And put that gun away. If I'm going to do this, I don't want to worry about being shot if my hand slips." Vincent hesitated, then holstered the weapon. He nodded, a flicker of respect crossing his face. Sierra walked to the sink. She turned on the water, scrubbing her hands and arms with violent intensity. She looked at her reflection in the chrome dispenser. She didn't recognize herself. Sierra Brooks, the victim, was gone. In her place was someone else. Someone capable of carving into a mafia kingpin while his soldiers watched. She stepped into the sterile field, gowning up. She picked up the scalpel. It felt heavy. She looked down at Darren's abdomen. The bruising was purple and ugly. "Scalpel," she whispered to herself. She made the incision. The next hour was a blur of blood and focus. Sierra worked in a trance. She found the bleeder, a torn mesenteric artery. She clamped it. Her hands moved with a dexterity she didn't know she possessed. She found the bullet, lodged dangerously close to the spine. "Careful," Vincent whispered, leaning over her shoulder. "Back off," Sierra snapped without looking up. "I need light." She teased the bullet out, the metal clinking into the kidney dish. A collective sigh went through the room. "Closing," she announced. She stitched him up, layer by layer, burying the violence under neat, black silk sutures. When she placed the final dressing, her knees gave out. She grabbed the edge of the operating table to steady herself. "Vitals?" she asked. "Stable," Mateo said, staring at the monitor like it was a miracle. 110 over 70, heart rate 85. Sierra stripped off her bloody gloves and threw them in the bin. She turned to look at Vincent. He wasn't looking at the monitor. He was looking at her. "You did it," he said. "I did," Sierra exhaled, the adrenaline crashing. "Now I need a drink." Vincent gestured to the door. "The bar is in the lounge. Help yourself. You're a guest of the house now." Sierra walked out of the medical bay and into the massive living room. She went straight to the crystal decanter on the sideboard and poured a stiff scotch. She took a sip, the burn grounding her. She walked to the window. 50 stories down, The city lights twinkled like diamonds. Somewhere out there, Luca was plotting. Somewhere out there, her ex-husband might be looking for her. But right here, in the wolf's den, she was alive. She heard the door of the medical bay open. She turned. Vincent walked out. He stopped in the middle of the room. "Darren is awake," Vincent said. "He wants to see you." Sierra gripped her glass tighter. "Tell him to rest." "He insists," Vincent said. "And Sierra?" "Yes." "You're not just a guest anymore," Vincent said, a dark smile playing on his lips. "You saved the Don twice. That makes you family. And nobody leaves the family." Sierra turned back to the window, looking at her reflection in the glass. She was trapped in a golden cage, guarded by 500 SUVs, and a man who owed her his life. She took another sip of scotch. "We'll see about that," she whispered. 2 weeks. For 14 days, Sierra had been a prisoner in the sky. It was a beautiful prison, certainly. The Moretti penthouse was filled with chef-prepared meals, silk sheets, and a library that rivaled small universities. But every time she approached the private elevator, a guard, usually the stoic Matteo, would politely step in her path. "Not today, Miss Brooks. The threat level is still red." Sierra was pacing the length of the living room, wearing a cashmere sweater that Vincent had procured for her, when the heavy oak doors of the master suite opened. Darren walked out. It was the first time she had seen him standing fully upright since the surgery. He was wearing a dark navy suit, tailored to perfection, hiding the bandages and the vulnerability she knew lay beneath. He leaned slightly on a cane with a silver handle, but the weakness only added to his menacing elegance. He didn't look like a patient anymore. He looked like the Emperor of New York. "You're pacing," Darren observed, his voice smooth, the gravel of the fever replaced by a rich baritone. "You're wearing a hole in my Persian rug." "I want to leave, Darren," Sierra said, stopping to face him. "You're healed. The stitches are out. My debt is paid." Darren limped over to the wet bar, pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water. He slid one across the marble counter toward her. "Your debt is paid," he agreed. "But we have a new problem." "We?" Sierra scoffed. "There is no we. There is you, the mob boss, and me, the nurse who was in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Sit," Darren commanded. It wasn't shouted, but the authority in the single word made her knees unlock. She sat on the bar stool. Darren pulled a tablet from his jacket pocket and placed it in front of her. "My brother, Luca, has been busy," Darren said. "Since he failed to kill me, he has moved to Plan B. He is spreading rumors that the surgery left me incapacitated, brain damaged, weak. He is rallying the capos to call for a vote of no confidence." "What does that have to do with me?" Darren swiped the screen. A photo appeared. It was a grainy, zoomed-in shot of Sierra stepping out of the armored SUV 2 weeks ago, her hair messy, looking terrified. "Luca had a photographer on the roof across the street," Darren explained. "He knows I brought a woman home. He's spinning a narrative that I've retired to play house with a mistress while the business crumbles." Sierra stared at her face on the screen. "So? Let them talk." "If they believe I am weak, they attack," Darren said, leaning in, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "To stop a war, I need to show them I am strong, stable, and planning for the future." "And how do you do that?" "By attending the Winter Solstice Gala at the Pierre Hotel tomorrow night," Darren said. "And by introducing you, not as a nurse, not as a mistress." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "As my fiancé." Sierra laughed. It was a dry, incredulous sound. "You're insane." "Absolutely not. I am not playing pretend with the Mafia. It's one night, Sierra. No, I'm leaving. Today." She stood up. "Sit down, Sierra." Darren's voice dropped an octave. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. He swiped the tablet screen again. This time, the image wasn't of Sierra. It was a police file, a mugshot of a man with cold, pale blue eyes and a jaw set in rigid anger. Sierra felt the air leave her lungs. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. "You know this man," Darren stated. "Gavin," she whispered. How did you get this?" "Gavin Price," Darren read from the file. "Detective, Chicago PD, decorated officer, suspended twice for excessive force. Domestic abuse complaints filed by his ex-wife, Sierra Brooks, all dropped, or rather, lost, by the department." Sierra was trembling. "He's looking for me." "He is," Darren confirmed, "and he's close. My intelligence network flagged a credit card inquiry in your name in upstate New York 3 days ago. He tracked your car to the trailhead near the cabin." Sierra felt sick. She had run 1,000 miles to escape Gavin, and he was still hunting her. "If you walk out those elevator doors," Darren said softly, moving around the bar to stand next to her, "you are alone. You have no resources, no protection, and a detective with a badge and a gun is hunting you. He will find you, Sierra. It's a matter of days." He reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, terrifying and comforting all at once. "But if you are my fiancé," Darren continued, "you are untouchable. Not even the police touch the Moretti family without a warrant and a SWAT team. If you wear my ring, you are under the protection of the most powerful organization on the East Coast. Gavin Price wouldn't get within 10 miles of you." Sierra looked up at him. She saw the calculation, yes, but she also saw the truth. He was offering her the one thing she had never had: safety. But the price was her soul. "One night," she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "One night to convince the world," Darren promised. "And then you stay under my protection as long as you need, until he is handled." "You can't kill a cop, Darren." Darren smiled. It was a cold, beautiful smile. "I don't have to kill him, Sierra. I just have to make him wish he'd never heard your name." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. He snapped it open. Inside sat a diamond, the size of a quail's egg, an emerald cut set in platinum. It was heavy, ostentatious, and undeniably real. "So," Darren asked, holding the ring up to the light, "do we have a deal?" Sierra looked at the ring, then at the photo of Gavin, the monster she knew, and finally at Darren, the monster she was beginning to understand. She held out her hand. "Deal." The Pierre Hotel was a fortress of limestone and light on Fifth Avenue. The Winter Solstice Gala was the event of the season, where politicians rubbed shoulders with real estate moguls, and where the lines between the legal and illegal worlds blurred under the influence of expensive champagne. Sierra stood in front of the full-length mirror in the hotel suite Darren had rented for preparation. The dress was a weapon. It was emerald green velvet, a nod to the ring on her finger. It was strapless, hugging every curve of her body before cascading into a dramatic train. Her hair had been swept up into an intricate chignon, exposing the long line of her neck. She looked expensive. She looked powerful. She looked like she belonged to Darren Moretti. "Breathe," she told her reflection. The door opened. Darren entered. He stopped dead. He was wearing a black tuxedo with a velvet lapel that matched her dress perfectly. He looked devastating. The cane was gone. He had forced himself to walk without it for the night, fueled by painkillers and sheer willpower. He walked up behind her, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror. He placed his hands on her bare shoulders. His palms were warm. "You look..." Darren paused, searching for the word. "Dangerous." "I feel like I'm wearing a costume," Sierra admitted. "We all wear costumes, Sierra. Tonight, yours is just more expensive." He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "Remember the rules. Smile. Stay close. And if anyone asks how we met in Aspen. Skiing accident. You nursed me back to health. It's close enough to the truth to be believable. And Luca will be there." Darren's grip on her shoulders tightened slightly. "Do not let him separate us. He is a snake. He charms before he strikes." They took the elevator down. The lobby was a gauntlet of flashbulbs. As they stepped out, the noise was deafening. "Mr. Moretti! Mr. Moretti! Is it true you were shot? Who is the mystery woman?" Darren didn't answer. He simply placed a possessive hand on the small of Sierra's back and guided her through the sharks. He moved with a predator's grace, projecting an aura of absolute control. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere changed. It was quieter, but the tension was thicker. The air smelled of lilies and old money. Every head turned. The music seemed to falter for a beat. Darren Moretti, the man rumored to be dead in a snowbank, had just walked in looking like a king, with a woman who looked like a queen on his arm. "Smile," Darren whispered. Sierra pasted a dazzling smile on her face. They moved through the crowd. Darren introduced her to judges, senators, and CEOs. She played the part perfectly. Charming, slightly demure, utterly devoted. "Brother." The voice was like oil on water. The crowd parted. A man stepped forward. He looked like Darren, but softer, his features less sharp, his smile too wide. He held a glass of champagne in one hand. Luca Moretti. "Luca?" Darren nodded, his face a mask of indifference. "I see you're enjoying the open bar." "I was drinking a toast to your memory," Luca said, his eyes darting to Darren's midsection, looking for weakness. "I heard terrible things. A skiing accident?" "Exaggerated," Darren said dryly. "As you can see." Luca turned his gaze to Sierra. It felt like a physical violation. He raked his eyes over her dress, lingering on the diamond ring. "And who is this enchantment?" Luca asked, taking Sierra's hand before she could pull away. He brought it to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. "The nurse I heard so much about?" "Sierra," Darren said, his voice hard. "My fiancée." Luca raised an eyebrow. "Fiancée? My. You have been busy. Congratulations. She is exquisite." He didn't let go of her hand. "But tell me, Sierra, are you enjoying New York? It's a big change from Chicago, isn't it?" Sierra froze. The smile slipped from her face. Luca saw the fear. He smiled, satisfied. "Oh, don't look so surprised. We do our homework. In fact, I met someone recently who is also from Chicago. A fascinating man, very intense. He's been looking for you everywhere." Darren stepped forward, physically placing himself between Luca and Sierra. "Careful, Luca." "I'm just being a good host." Luca spread his hands innocently. "I thought a reunion would be nice. A wedding gift, perhaps." Luca snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the colonnade near the terrace doors, a figure emerged. He was wearing a cheap suit that fit poorly across his broad, steroid-enhanced shoulders. His hair was a military buzz cut. His jaw was set in that familiar, terrifying line that Sierra had seen in her nightmares for 3 years. Gavin. He walked into the light. He wasn't looking at Darren. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking only at Sierra. His eyes were burning with a twisted mixture of possession and rage. "Hello, Sierra," Gavin said. His voice was calm, the calm before the violence. "You're a hard woman to find." Sierra couldn't breathe. The ballroom spun. "Detective Price," Luca said, stepping back to watch the fireworks. "I believe you have a warrant?" "I do." Gavin reached into his jacket. Darren's security detail tensed, hands going to their weapons. But Gavin didn't pull a gun. He pulled a folded paper. "Sierra Brooks, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of a police officer and grand larceny." "Lies!" Sierra screamed, the sound tearing out of her throat. "He's lying." "The warrant is valid," Gavin smirked, stepping closer. "NYPD is outside to assist with the extradition. You're coming home, honey." Darren didn't move. He stood like a statue. "Darren," Sierra grabbed his arm. "Please." Darren looked at Gavin. Then he looked at Luca. He saw the trap. If he let the police take her, he looked weak. If he stopped a police officer in front of half the city's elite, he started a war with the NYPD. "She's not going anywhere," Darren said quietly. "She is," Gavin said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Unless you want to add obstruction of justice and kidnapping to your rap sheet, Mr. Moretti. Step aside. This is police business." Gavin reached for Sierra. Sierra flinched back, knocking into a waiter. A tray of champagne glasses crashed to the floor, shattering. The sound silenced the entire room. In the dead silence, Darren moved. He didn't strike Gavin. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply stepped forward, chest to chest with the detective, and spoke loud enough for the police commissioner, who was standing 10 feet away, to hear. "You are mistaken, Detective," Darren said clearly. "This woman is not Sierra Brooks." Gavin blinked. "What? I know my own wife." "This woman," Darren said, taking Sierra's trembling hand and raising it high, the diamond catching the chandelier light, "is Sierra Moretti. We were married this morning at City Hall." A gasp went through the room. Luca's smile vanished. "And," Darren continued, his voice turning into a growl that vibrated in Gavin's chest, "spousal privilege applies. Furthermore, as a diplomat for the Sovereign Order of Malta, a title my family has held for generations, my wife shares my diplomatic immunity until this warrant is reviewed by federal authorities." It was a lie. A bold, magnificent, legally dubious lie. But it was enough to pause the game. "Get out of my face," Darren whispered to Gavin, "before I have you buried in the foundation of the new precinct." Gavin hesitated. He looked at the commissioner, who gave a subtle shake of his head. This wasn't the place. Gavin leaned in, his breath hot on Sierra's face. "This isn't over, Sierra. You can't hide behind him forever. I'll be waiting." He turned and stormed out. Luca looked at Darren, a vein throbbing in his temple. "Well played, brother. But a lie is a fragile shield." "It's not a lie," Darren said, pulling Sierra against his side, his grip bruising. He looked down at her, his eyes blazing with a dark, intense promise. "We're going to the courthouse, tonight. We make it real." Sierra looked at him. The trap had snapped shut. She was safe from Gavin, yes, but she was now bound, legally and irrevocably, to the king of the underworld. "Let's go," Darren commanded. As they walked out of the ballroom, leaving the shattered glass behind them, Sierra realized the truth. She hadn't been rescued. She had been claimed. The elevator doors slid open at 3 a.m., revealing the silent grandeur of the penthouse. Sierra touched the heavy platinum band on her finger. It felt like both a shackle and a shield. Darren loosened his tie, ignoring the view of the sleeping city. He stared intently at the shadows beneath the floating staircase. "Come out, Luca," Darren said, his voice a low rumble. "You're scuffing the floor." Sierra froze. From the darkness, Luca Moretti stepped out, a silenced pistol in hand. But the real horror emerged from the kitchen entrance. Gavin stepped into the light, his service weapon raised and leveled at Sierra's chest. "You really should upgrade your security," Luca smirked. "It's amazing what a concierge will do for 50 grand. Sierra backed up until she hit the wall. Gavin's eyes were wild, fueled by a toxic mix of rage and entitlement. "I told you," he spat, advancing on her. "You don't get to win. It ends with you dead, and me the hero cop who took down a crime lord." "A deal?" Darren chuckled darkly, unbothered by the gun pointed at his heart. "You promised the cop glory. That's sloppy, Luca." "It's effective," Luca shrugged. "Do it, Gavin. Shoot her." Gavin's finger tightened on the trigger. Sierra squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the end. Click. The sound was deafening. No bang, just metal striking metal. Gavin frowned, pulling the trigger again. Click, click. Panic replaced the mania in his eyes. He looked at Luca for help, but his partner was already laughing. Luca turned his weapon, not toward Darren, but toward Gavin. Bang! The shot was a muffled cough. Gavin collapsed, clutching his leg, screaming as blood pooled on the marble. "I don't understand," Luca stammered, looking from his gun to his brother. I shot him." "You shot the floor," Darren corrected. He pressed a button on a remote, and the penthouse lights flared to full brightness. The elevator opened again, and Vincent stepped out. "Vincent swapped the magazine in the kitchen," Darren explained, walking slowly toward the writhing detective. "Blanks. I wanted to see if he would actually pull the trigger, if he truly loved you, or if he just wanted to possess you." He looked at Sierra. "He chose death. He's yours." Sierra looked down at the man who had tormented her for years. He looked small now, broken. "I want him to disappear," Sierra said, her voice hardening into steel. "General population, no badge, no protection. I want him to know, every single day, that I put him there." "Done," Darren nodded. Vincent grabbed Gavin by the collar, dragging the screaming man back into the elevator. Now, only Luca remained. The arrogance vanished, replaced by trembling fear. He fell to his knees. "Brother, it was business. I'll go to Italy. You'll never see me again." Darren turned to his wife. "What do you think, Mrs. Moretti? Do we believe him?" Sierra walked over to Darren, placing her hand over his heart. She looked at Luca, the man who would have killed them both without a second thought. "A wolf doesn't stop hunting just because he changes forests," she said softly. Darren smiled, kissing her forehead. "Goodbye, Luca." 2 guards emerged from the shadows, hauling the pleading underboss away. The doors closed, sealing the past away forever. Sierra walked to the window as the sun began to rise over Manhattan, painting the sky in violet and gold. Darren wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You saved me," he whispered. "We saved each other," Sierra corrected, leaning back into him. Below, the fleet of black SUVs was still waiting, a legion of iron soldiers guarding their castle. Sierra Brooks had died in a cabin in the Catskills. Sierra Moretti was just beginning to live. And that is the story of how a freezing night in the mountains turned into an empire of fire and ice. From a lonely cabin to the penthouse of the underworld, Sierra didn't just survive the mafia, she conquered it. What did you think of Darren's final test for Gavin? And did Sierra make the right choice in the end? Or was she too merciful? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want more mafia romance dramas. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss the next part of our storytelling journey. Up next, we have a story about a billionaire who buys a failing bakery just to find the woman who rejected him in high school. Click the video on screen now to listen. Thanks for watching.